In the wild days of the American West in my home state of Montana, a sheriff named Henry Plummer kept law by day and robbed stagecoaches and murdered by night. And legend has it, he left behind a treasure no one's ever found. This is the story of the missing treasure of the outlaw Sheriff Plummer. In 1863, the Montana Territory was exploding with gold fever. Thousands of miners flooded in, and towns like Bannack, Diamond City, Last Chance Gulch, and Virginia City popped up overnight. It was rough, lawless, rich with opportunity, and deadly. Henry Plummer was a debonair, well-dressed man, but he was also a man with a shadowy past. He was originally from Maine, but the gold rush eventually pulled him west. In the 1850s, he became a successful miner in California and soon got involved in politics. But by his mid-20s, he was elected sheriff to Nevada City, California, a surprising achievement for someone so young. He was respected, charming, and carried himself with intelligence and charisma, but soon his life began to spiral. In 1857, Plummer shot and killed John Vetter, the allegedly abusive husband of a woman he was romantically interested in. He claimed self-defense, but was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 10 years in San Quentin prison. After serving only 6 years, he was pardoned, reportedly because of poor health, though some accounts suggest political influence and sympathy for his case played a role. Once free, Plummer drifted again, following the mining booms across the frontier, and he found more trouble. Plummer supposedly killed a man named William Riley, though some accounts claim it was a man named Perkins, around 1861 in Washington Territory in a mining claim dispute. The story goes that Plummer again claimed self-defense and was acquitted. By the early 1860s, he had made his way to Bannack, Montana Territory, a rowdy mining camp in desperate need of law and order. In 1863, the citizens of Bannack elected him sheriff. On the surface, Sheriff Plummer tried to establish law and order. He was good with people, persuasive, and even seemed sympathetic to struggling miners. But behind the badge, Plummer was hiding a secret. He wasn't just fighting crime, he was organizing it. Plummer allegedly led a gang of over 100 outlaws called the Innocents, whose password was ironically, "I am innocent." Their favorite hobbies? Stagecoach robberies, miner shakedowns, murder, and living it up at the shebangs. Shebang was frontier slang for rough and rowdy establishments, part saloon, part gambling den, sometimes doubling as a dance hall or even a brothel. They were thrown together out of logs or canvas, often ramshackle, but always lively. If you were a miner with gold in your poke after a long day of digging, the shebangs were where you went to drink, gamble, and blow it all in one night. Bannack shebangs were notorious. They were places of rowdy music, whiskey-fueled brawls, and women who entertained the miners. They had names like Bucket of Blood Saloon, and they attracted not just honest prospectors, but also con men, gamblers, and thieves. This is where Sheriff Henry Plummer spent much of his time. His close associates often operated out of these shebangs, and some witnesses later claimed that Plummer himself used them as meeting places for his outlaw gang. For many, the shebangs symbolized everything wrong with Bannack: lawlessness, vice, corruption, right under the sheriff's nose. Historians estimate the gang may have killed over 100 people. Still, suspicion grew that Plummer, the very man entrusted to enforce the law, was orchestrating much of the violence. And eventually the people had had enough and decided to take the law into their own hands, forming a vigilante group known simply as the Montana Vigilantes. They weren't a ragtag mob. They were made up of prominent citizens, merchants, miners, and even local leaders. Many were respected men who felt the courts and sheriffs were powerless, or worse, corrupt. Some notable vigilante leaders included Thomas J. Dimsdale, a newspaper editor in Virginia City, Nathaniel P. Langford, who would later become the first superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, Wilbur F. Sanders, who went on to become a U.S. Senator. Montana Vigilantes began using cryptic numbers 3777 as a calling card. If you saw those numbers scrawled on your door, it meant one thing: leave town or face the noose. The exact meaning of 3777 has never been fully proven, and historians have argued about it for over a century. Some of the leading theories include grave dimensions, 3 feet wide, 7 feet long, and 77 inches deep, a not-so-subtle reminder of the size of a coffin. Stagecoach fare, $3.77, was supposedly the price of a one-way stagecoach ticket out of Montana, meaning buy a ticket and leave or else. Some suggest it's tied to Masonic ritual or symbolism, since many of the vigilantes were Freemasons. Or there's another theory that the numbers represent members who are from other states. For example, 3 vigilantes were previously vigilantes in California, where it was common for vigilante groups to use numbers to represent themselves. These members would have shown the Montana Vigilantes how to organize and operate. Regardless of its exact origin, 3777 became the official mark of the Montana Vigilantes. And if you're cruising around Montana today, you can see 3777 on law enforcement vehicles, which is an homage to Montana's commitment to justice. In January 1864, the Montana Vigilantes finally made their move on Plummer. At just 31 years old, he was arrested without trial, dragged to the gallows in the freezing cold, and hanged alongside 2 of his deputies. Over the next month, they executed more than 20 alleged innocents. But before he died, Plummer made a desperate plea. "Give me 2 hours, and I'll return with enough gold to buy my freedom." But the vigilantes wouldn't give him those 2 hours, and from that moment, the legend of Plummer's Gold began. For over a century and a half, treasure hunters, historians, and thrill seekers have tried to find Plummer's Gold and the truth. Rumors point to a rugged stretch of wilderness just outside of Bannack. Some claim Plummer and his gang buried multiple stashes of stolen gold dust, nuggets, and coins there, loot from years of robberies. Estimates suggest that today it could be worth millions. Others say it's buried closer to Virginia City or near abandoned cabins Plummer used as safe houses. A few locals believe he used mine shafts, which are dangerous and hard to access, to hide the treasure. Still others say there was never a treasure at all, that Plummer bluffed in an attempt to save his life. Today, Bannack is a ghost town, preserved as a state park. Tourists walk the same streets Henry Plummer once patrolled and betrayed. The gallows where he was hanged still stand, and somewhere in the hills, treasure hunters still search, metal detectors in hand, chasing shadows of a buried fortune. Whether it's gold, mystery, or a piece of forgotten history, the story still draws people in. I have an interesting tie to this story. My great-great-great-grandfather, Rufus Thompson, moved to Alder Gulch in Bannack in 1863, the year Plummer was elected sheriff, and he allegedly claimed to be a member of the Vigilantes. I wish I could hear his first-hand account of what life was really like back then. This was an interesting time for the West, where the good and bad sides of man wrestled for control. And before law and order could be established, justice had to be taken into the hands of ordinary citizens who couldn't wait for the West to catch up with the rest of the country. As it was often said back then, "Go west, young man, and grow up with the country," which was a quote popularized by Horace Greeley, editor of the New York Tribune. It's represented well in one of my all-time favorite movies, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, where law and order in the form of a lawyer, played by Jimmy Stewart, comes to settle the lawless West, with its frontier justice represented by the righteous gunslinger John Wayne as they tangle with the villain Liberty Valance, played by the imposing Lee Marvin. One of the lesser-known dynamics of the West was around who was populating the burgeoning society. By the early 1860s, Montana Territory was filling with miners from both the Union North and the Confederate South. Political and Civil War tensions bled into local conflicts. Arguments in saloons over Lincoln, secession, or states' rights could turn violent. Plummer himself was sympathetic to Southern Democrats. He likely leaned toward the Copperheads, who were Northern Democrats critical of Lincoln. Most of the leaders of the Montana Vigilantes were Republicans and Unionists. When the vigilantes accused Plummer of running the Innocence Gang, his politics made him even more suspect. To many Unionist miners back in Bannack and Virginia City, a Democratic sheriff who was soft on crime, especially on Southerners, looked suspicious. Believe it or not, historians debate if Henry Plummer truly was an outlaw mastermind hiding behind the sheriff's badge, or if he was a convenient scapegoat in a violent frontier town that needed someone to blame. One piece of evidence? According to vigilante Thomas Dinsdale in his book The Vigilantes of Montana, crime dropped sharply after Plummer and the Innocents were hanged. Stagecoach robberies and road agent killings almost disappeared. And several members of the Innocents claimed that Sheriff Plummer was the leader of the gang. Before he was executed in January 1864, Red Yeager supposedly confessed that Sheriff Plummer was the leader of the road agents. And why did Plummer end up in Bannack, where all the Innocents were located? Well, it turns out that at least a few of the Innocents were imprisoned in San Quentin around the same time as Plummer. This overlap fueled the vigilantes' case. They argued Plummer didn't just fall in with bad men in Montana, he had prior connections with them going back years. To the vigilantes, it looked like an organized network of ex-cons regrouped in Montana's gold camps under Plummer's leadership. And Plummer's claim of a hidden treasure right before being hanged doesn't sound like the words of an innocent man. Plus, those were not in fact his last words. According to some accounts, his final words weren't a plea for his life or a proclamation of his innocence. They were, "Give me a high drop, boys," the perfect line for an outlaw sheriff. Growing up in Montana, this was one of my favorite stories, especially with my family ties to it. And it always seems obvious to me that Plummer was a guilty man. And while it's true that the vigilantes largely wrote the accounts of the time and would have had a vested interest in justifying their hangings, there is a mountain of evidence against Plummer. And to me, a pretty clear profile on who he was as a man. Historians may dispute if he was guilty or innocent, but it's important to think for yourself and draw your own conclusions. A practice I would recommend against any mainstream narratives that we are told to never question. And I tend to think there really was a treasure. But I think that treasure was found and spent a long time ago. After all, life was hard back then for his gang, and she bangs, she bangs. So what do you think? Was Henry Plummer a criminal mastermind, or was he wrongfully accused? And was there really a buried treasure, or was that just a wild claim made by a desperate man? I hope someday we'll know everything for sure. But in the meantime, it's a great story. Thank you for tuning into one of my favorite stories today. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. If you found this topic fascinating, please give this video a like, leave a comment. I'd love to know your theories, and share it with someone who enjoys history, the Wild West, missing treasure, and mysteries. And it would mean a lot to me if you would subscribe. This is a new channel, and I'm making a lot of videos about what I find interesting, and I hope to find some people along the way that wonder about the same things that I do. So please follow along, say hi, and let's figure this stuff out together. And if you'd like to keep up with the show, follow us on social media or check out our website at bradthoughts.com, where we have our production calendar and links to everything all in one place. Plus, you can submit your favorite subjects to potentially have them made into an episode. And lastly, if you'd like to support the show and help us take our content to the next level, you can become a Patreon member for exclusive perks starting at just a few bucks a month. Or you can pick up something from my personal line of clothing, Dagger of Truth, at daggeroftruth.com. See below for links to everything, and make sure to check out our upcoming videos because you never know what I'm going to get into next. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, keep going.